They know that Donald Trump is facing quite a challenging and difficult situation in Iran. Also, I think the Russians are feeling a bit emboldened right now in Ukraine, given the nature of some of the strikes that have expanded over the last month or two. So I think that Ratcliffe is going to find some stern faces when he talks to folks in Moscow. And again, I think the Russians may try to play hardball here. Again, if they agree to do something that is supportive of U.S. Interests in Iran, they are certainly going to want to extract concessions when it comes to Ukraine, which is their primary foreign policy issue at this point.
John, I want to start here. For what purpose would the CIA director drop into Moscow in this way for a sort of brief visit?
Well, I think the most important issue right now that's facing the Trump administration is the conflict with Iran. So I presume that Director Ratcliffe was sent to Moscow to engage in a conversation about the situation there and maybe even send a very clear message to the senior Russian officials about the need to stop their support for the Iranian regime, which covers a lot of technical, military, and even economic issues.
What's the distinction, I suppose, in the message he may be carrying when it's him that does that rather than a sort of more obvious diplomatic figure, I suppose?
Well, maybe they were trying to keep the trip quiet, but the fact of the trip got reported in the press. But also, John Ratcliffe is somebody who's very loyal to Donald Trump. He's close to Donald Trump. He's been involved in a lot of the discussions and meetings related to Iran. So I think it carries a fair amount of gravitas by bringing the CIA director there. And again, it may be that there's going to be some type of discussion about a possible trade-off between seeking Russian concessions on Iran and, unfortunately, maybe giving up something from the United States side on Ukraine, which is very troubling and worrying.
Is the fact that we know about this interesting to you? And I say that because there are countless operations, missions carried out by the CIA about which we know nothing. And this is one that we have found out about. Is that significant?
Well, when the CIA director travels, it's on his own military plane. It's a C-17. That's been reported. That's the way I traveled to Moscow twice during my time, and usually try to keep these things quiet in advance. But unfortunately, right now, Washington seems to be leaking quite a bit in terms of information, and the White House in particular. So I don't know whether or not this was an intentional leak to the press, or this was something that somebody who was not authorized to talk to the press decided to take it upon themselves and let them know. But it's a bit unusual for a CIA director to go to Moscow, particularly in light of what's going on in the region.
Yeah. I'm struck as well, John, just to learn a little about your experiences of travelling to Moscow, because I don't imagine it's the easiest trip for a CIA director, CIA operative to make. How does the build-up to a trip like that work? What arrangements need to be in place in order to ensure that the trip can actually happen?
Well, I went there twice during my time as CIA director. Once it was scheduled, and so there were a lot of preparations on both sides, and so we were making plans weeks in advance. My second trip back in 2016 was a rather urgent trip to talk to the Russians about what was going on in Syria. And so that was hurriedly put together. And so what we needed to do was to make sure that the Russians would accept my visit and then move forward quickly with making sure that the talking points that I had, the message I had to deliver was going to be conveyed to the highest levels of government. So something like this, I think this was an urgent matter. And so it was put together probably in the last few days. But clearly it was done with quite a bit of prominence in terms of the White House wanted this to happen.
Who would he have met with, John Ratcliffe, when he was there yesterday?
Well, he probably met with his counterpart, the head of the SVR, and maybe also the head of the FSB, Alexander Bortnikov. I don't know whether he would have a meeting with Vladimir Putin or not. Again, it would all depend on what Washington conveyed to Moscow about the purpose and the reason for the visit. So it could be one of Putin's deputies or Foreign Minister Lavrov or whatever. But again, depending on the importance, significance, and maybe also the nature of any type of ultimatum that Washington might try to deliver to Russia in terms of the secondary sanctions that were recently announced on any country or bank or entity dealing with the Iranians. Wanted to make sure that this message was going to be conveyed very clearly, personally, and in person.
Mm. What would you anticipate the outcome of all of this to be, John? Because I was looking back at during the Biden administration when the CIA director at the time, William Burns, who had actually been an ambassador to Russia as well, he made at least one trip to Moscow. That was in November 2021. And he warned Putin against invading Ukraine. He pointed to intelligence that the US had about his plans for an all out assault. And it was, 3 months later that Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. So I suppose I'm trying to draw a line between a visit of this nature and what a realistic anticipation of an outcome should be.
Well, I think the Russians are not going to be intimidated at this point by Director Ratcliffe or by the United States. They know that Donald Trump is facing quite a challenging and difficult situation in Iran. Also, I think the Russians are feeling a bit emboldened right now in Ukraine, given the nature of some of the strikes that have expanded over the last month or two. So I think that Ratcliffe is going to find some stern faces when he talks to folks in Moscow. And again, I think the Russians may try to play hardball here. Again, if they agree to do something that is supportive of U.S. interests in Iran, they are certainly going to want to extract concessions when it comes to Ukraine, which is their primary foreign policy issue at this point.
I think the other thing, John, that always gets me as somebody who has never moved in these circles at all is, I suppose, the different tracks that relationships between countries can run on. I read some reporting that suggests that the Kremlin's valued continuing ties between the intelligence services of Russia and the US, even if political ties have been strained around the invasion of Ukraine, the US being on the side of Ukraine, sanctions being implemented on Russia. To me, it seems as though there are these different levels. There's the political level, which can be frayed and difficult, but the intelligence agencies perhaps still get along and still share intelligence.
Well, first of all, I don't think it's that they get along, but they do maintain communication with one another. And that situation is not unique to the United States and Russia. The United States has maintained relations with a number of, or U.S. intelligence agencies have maintained their interaction with a lot of intelligence services of our adversaries, because they know that such intelligence channels can be kept very secure, and usually you can pass very important and high-level messages through those channels. So during my tenure, I would maintain those contacts with a variety of countries, including those that we didn't have good relations with. And even when diplomatic relations are broken, intelligence channels frequently stay available so that they can be utilized, especially in emergency situations.
John, it's so good to be speaking with you. Thank you very much.